everybody, and welcome to another video. And today it is the 11th of February, and today I'm going to be talking about the situation around Krasna Hora and the Kupiansk front. Let's begin with this geolocated video of the bridge across the water canal, which is really a part of the T0504 road, the road that I've been talking about in basically every video. So you see in this video, I'm not going to show it, but it was publicized by a Russian Telegram channel, I believe, and it shows the damage that was done either by Russian shelling or a Ukrainian detonation to the bridge. So this basically means that it is inoperable and that the Russians cannot use it to now maneuver past the open fields and past the general area of Ivanivske into a place like Chasiv Yar. They can't use it either to advance onto Stubochki or towards the town of Konstantinivka. So the T0504 road is the road that connects Konstantinivka to Bakhmut over here. You could see the course is generally like this. And then Konstantinivka is one of the main cities along Ukraine's main defensive line, which runs from Slavyansk to Kramatorsk to Druskivka, and then, as I said, to Konstantinivka. So that's the importance of the road, but now because of this destruction, it cannot be used by the Russians to continue their advance. And so that is why I believe that it was Ukraine that was behind the detonation. But besides that, there really weren't any updates on the Bakhmut front specifically, but we did have some updates around Krasna Hora. So I'm marking all of Krasna Hora as under Russian control. It is possible that maybe you still have some remnants of the Ukrainian garrison that are still in Krasna Hora, specifically in this box over here. Maybe you have some Ukrainian platoons maybe or squads that are trying to retreat across the river towards Paraskoviivka, but in general, the Russians have been able to get full control over the town. And we know this because of this video, which was posted by Ukrainian sources, as probably to show how they were targeting Russian forces. And it shows them that they were targeting troop concentrations in some of these larger duplexes, maybe some of these larger structures where you had some Russian assault detachments stationed. So that confirms that the Wagner Group is pretty deep into Krasna Hora and that the Ukrainians are forced to retreat. According to Russian sources, the 54th Mechanized Brigade was the unit that was stationed over here, and that it was really the unit primarily responsible for the defense of Krasna Hora, despite the town being attacked from 3 different sides. If you can see, it was attacked from the north, where you had the Wagner Group take over defensive fortifications that they used to then advance deeper into the town. And then there's actually a video here that was posted by the 30th Brigade of them dropping grenades on the Wagner Group. Then obviously we had the attack from the east. The attack from the east attacked the orchards and then tried to infiltrate into the residential section of the town. And then from the south we had the Wagner Group take over this factory over here, and then it gave them some pretty strategically significant positions that were able to overlook the residential areas and advance deeper into the town from the south. So you had these attacks from 3 different sides, which really put a lot of pressure onto the 54th Mechanized Brigade. Despite that fact, they were able to hold on for several weeks, but eventually their defense disintegrated and it was very difficult for them to retreat. So some companies were able to get out alive. Others were probably killed or taken POW in the ensuing chaos, but the unit itself is now probably stationed in Paraskoviivka, where you have the main Ukrainian garrison that we're now focusing on. Since the Russians have now basically cleared the town of Krasna Hora, they need to cross over the Bakhmutovka River. The Bakhmutovka River is over here. It's not wide, but it is pretty deep in this specific area, and so it will be a challenge for the Russians to cross over without the Ukrainians firing upon them from their fortified positions in the industrial sector of Paraskoviivka. So that's something to look out for. And so we're not even really going to see this, in my opinion. I think we're going to see more of attacks on the flanks, because that is really what the Russians tried doing around Krasna Hora, and we could see how it worked out for them. So now they perhaps will do that on a larger scale around Paraskoviivka. So In the video that I was talking about, that was geolocating the Wagner Group's advances, I actually looked at the video translation because I was really curious to see what the Ukrainians were saying in the video. And something interesting that they said is that they were actually mentioning Ukrainian pilots that were operating in the general area of Bakhmut. And then I sort of like connected this to something I was reading on Rybar, where they mentioned that there were Mi-8s and Mi-24s, Ukrainian helicopters, that were flying at low altitudes and targeting Wagner assault groups as they were conducting forward probing attacks. So this would indicate that you still have some Ukrainian aircraft that is airborne, despite the fact that a lot of their equipment was damaged throughout the course of the war. The Rybar report mentioned that the Ukrainians had moved this aircraft from the Vuhledar and Marinka directions, and so they were putting a greater emphasis on Bakhmut. And also it shows that they have a limited amount of aircraft, obviously due to the course of the war, but it also shows that they do still have some aircraft capabilities despite Russia trying for the better part of a year to neutralize the entirety of their air force. And then obviously they're getting some supplements from the West in terms of like helicopters and some aircraft. But all in all, these are operating at low altitude. They can't operate in the air for that long because usually the Russian air defense systems will intercept it if it's in the air for long enough. But when it is in the air, they do try to conduct sort of like these pinpoint operations targeting specific targets that are advancing along the front line, probing the Ukrainian lines. So that's the role that the helicopters play for the Ukrainians. Now, another thing that is important to mention in terms of the Paraskoviivka direction is that the Ukrainians have roughly 1,000 to 4,000 men over here. Those are the estimates that I read, but I think those are believable given the size of Paraskoviivka and the fact that there are multiple remnants of units that fought in Soledar and elsewhere that sort of try to regroup in this area. So you have like the 24th Mechanized Brigade, obviously 54th, like I said before, maybe 77th Air Mobile Assault Brigade has some battalions over here. Some of these units, like the 30th, we know that they're operating in the general area. That does not mean that all of their personnel are specifically over here. In the video that I was talking about before of the Ukrainians shelling Wagner, the guy in the video was saying that the Birds of Magyar Air Reconnaissance Group and the 43rd Heavy Artillery Brigade were quote-unquote working. What that means is that they're just like conducting the like military operations that are like actively shelling the Russian forces and trying to like neuter them. That's basically what he was referring to. And it does indicate that these two units are really playing an integral role in specifically the Krasna Hora front, trying to hold back the Russians. And so instead of attacking head-on, what we're seeing is that the Russians may try to conduct a larger pincer maneuver because they already have control over some residential blocks to the south of Paraskoviivka. They already have a foothold in the northern outskirts of the town, and they already basically have control of the road leading into Bakhmut to the northwest of Paraskoviivka. So you could see how this is really unfolding, and it's really going to culminate in the capture of Berkivka at this point. And if that were to happen, then you have a lot of Ukrainian troops, as I said, 1,000 to 4,000 encircled in this general area. And they could try to prevent this from occurring, the Ukrainians, by retreating now, which is something that we may see happen in the coming days. And they might try to retreat to Berkivka. But it will be difficult because there aren't many roads really that they can operate through. Of course, they can use the open fields because now like the ice is frozen. So it's better for trucks and for infantry fighting vehicles and for tanks. But again, it's through open fields. So it's not the most suitable for some larger equipment. Might be difficult to move large swaths of men and equipment cohesively through an open field, especially given the fact that it's just going to turn into a kill zone for the Russians as they're going to be actively shelling and firing upon it. So yeah, there are some issues with it, and I do believe that it could be disorganized if the Ukrainians are really short on time, which it seems like they are because of Russia continuing to apply pressure. So we're just going to have to see what happens over here. Let's move on to the situation around Kupiansk, which I do believe is interesting. Here in the Kupiansk direction, we have further reports so that the Russians were able to advance into Paraskoviivka, and the Ukrainians are basically fully withdrawn from the town. They do still have a presence in the forested areas to the south of it, where they have some of their DRG units. And then, of course, they have some of the regular units in relation to the National Guard or to the 67th Brigade or the 109th Brigade or the 103rd Brigade. And there's also the 14th Brigade somewhere in here. Here you have the 14th Separate Mechanized Brigade. They're playing a big role in Ukraine's defense of this general area around Kupiansk and Dvorichna, but they were forced to withdraw across the Oskil River, and so a lot of the coordination of the defensive activities now in the northern Oskil front is in the town of Dvorichna. So you have reports that over the past few days the Russians have been shelling Dvorichna a lot. You've seen an uptick in damage and casualties to civilians in this area. And so it does indicate that the Ukrainians may be forced to withdraw some of their equipment from this area. The Russians are increasing pressure, obviously. They're trying to get the Ukraine to leave the Oskil River, or at least the right side of the Oskil River from this perspective, as soon as possible. They're attacking in the direction, of course, of Paraskoviivka. Here's the exact front line in terms of Russia holding these lands, and then basically the area in between the Russian line of contact and the Oskil River is no man's land at the moment. So you see this entire area over here, and so the Russians are trying to clear it out right now. They're also trying to clear out Masyutivka and the area around Liman Perishi, where you have a lot of forests. So these forests are very difficult to fully control, so you could have Ukrainians in small groups trying to link up with one another to sporadically conduct assaults on the Russian lines. So that's the issue with having Ukraine, or allowing them to have a foothold across the river. Then you have this geolocated video of Russia shelling the bridge that allows the Ukrainians to cross the Oskil. This really needs to be destroyed because it is, and there are actually two bridges that allow the Ukrainians to cross over and fight in Paraskoviivka. And as long as they are up and running, the Ukrainians will be able to resupply and they will be able to retreat without much of an issue. Besides the fact that the Russians do have more of an artillery advantage. So in terms of more of the rumor side of things, I was reading on some of the Ukrainian and Russian telegrams about the situation over here, and some of the Russian sources, they were alleging that the Ukrainians were moving some of the construction equipment and administrative documents across the river from the eastern side of Kupiansk to the western side of Kupiansk in anticipation of some sort of Russian attack in this general direction. There's also reports that the leadership of the 14th Separate Mechanized Brigade was they moved from Kupiansk, which is a large city in the region, which is really used as a hub of coordination for the Zvatove front, that they were moved to the city of Kharkiv further west. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I saw mentioned. So it does seem like Ukraine is taking some precautions in anticipation of a potential Russian assault in this direction, which would really put an end to any sort of Ukrainian hopes of assaulting Zvatove and assaulting Kremina, because Russia would have really this strong foothold to the north, in the northern flank, and it would be able to quickly take over the chain of towns that Ukraine was able to take over in September and October. They would just advance to the south, and there wouldn't be much support given to them because Kupiansk is one of the main crossings across the Oskil River. So that's really the significance of Kupiansk, and you will see that a big part of Russia's push right now is sort of just giving them a buffer in the north, so that then they could fully focus on dislodging the Ukrainians from Kupiansk. Not that I'm saying it will happen anytime soon, but I'm saying that's why they're trying to shape the battlefield right now by kicking the Ukrainians out of the right side of the Oskil River. So I will update the situation, obviously, in this area if there are further developments. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys later. Bye.